Alice is multitasking now. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, so I know there's a range of you in today. Some of you will have had first-hand experience of the hub. Some of you might not be so familiar, and they've come along as a chance to learn about the funders. So before we do hear from them, I'm just going to give a really quick explanation of the hub. The hub is all about supporting community-led climate action across the Highlands and Islands. We work in the Highland Council region area, and we also work in Orkney and Shetland. The main thrust of what we do, we do supporting in a sort of informal, friendly, hand-holding kind of way. So we're available to do I guess, facilitating with groups and figure out what their needs are and what support we can provide. We can collaborate with organisations and jointly hold events or initiatives together. We also provide training. We are hoping to do more getting more peer-to-peer learning and more networking happening so that our members really get to know each other and share their learning more directly. So we're building on that just now. We also have funding available. So we've had we've got our seed funding for climate action projects. The fund's currently closed. We had a couple of rounds, but relatively recently. So the projects that were funded are now in action. They're active just now. It's for up to £500. So there's a lot that you can do with that, but it's not. I think there's a place for sort of different budgets of project, and that's why it's really great to hear from our funders just now about what opportunities are available that way. We have got other funding available too. We're currently running a pilot programme called Sustainable Spaces. So again, it's closed for application because we're working with, I think we've got 11 signed up to take place, and it's all about looking at improving the sustainability practices with the facilities they have. So the aim of the scheme is to work through a process of just creating an action plan about just what are the next steps in getting those places more sustainable. And there's a fund associated with the scheme to allow the groups to achieve maybe their first actions in that. And then the final thing that we have under our funding banner is we've got our food hygiene heroes. So we have a lot of groups who are working in food, whether it's community larders and fridges, and there's often a requirement to have a qualification for that. So we've got the food hygiene level 2 training available. So a lot of groups have found that useful. So we've got some funding opportunities from the hub itself. We're a membership organisation. I'm very much relying on my slides. I'm waiting to see the next slide. So I'm like, oh yes, there's the next thing. We're a membership organisation. It's free to become a member. And if you become a member, you have a say in what the hub is doing. So it's a useful thing to do. Members all get the newsletter, which tends to come out about once a month. And that gives an overview of what we're up to as an organisation and some of what the hub members are. We're very keen to share and promote what other organisations are doing. So if you're a member, it's much easier for us to then sort of amplify what you're up to and share that with everybody. We are having more events coming up soon, so I've got a bit more on this, but we're sort of developing a bit more sort of peer learning and learning exchange, as well as we've got some other training that we offer that we've occasionally had some sessions for training available. So yeah, I think we can go to the next one. Okay, and then my final set of slides are all about our hub gatherings. We're having lots of regional events. The first was actually yesterday in Lochaber. It went really well, I hear. It was just a really nice opportunity to bring people together, and a lot of people made really great connections there. So the whole thrust of these events are about kind of just letting members and people who are considering membership get to chat with each other. So our next one is in fact tomorrow, which Lucy's coordinating in Caithness. So the details are there. There's a good number of folks signed up for that, and Lucy's got an action-packed day, which is exciting and not at all stressful. So we've got that. We have next week, we've got the Badenoch and Strathspey event, which is taking place in Boat Hall. So that, again, there's quite a lot of people who are signed up, ready to go to that. You can still sign up if that's your area and you're interested. We have, oh, did I miss the Inverness? We have one in Inverness also next week, and we've got the Easter Ross one towards the end of the month in Alness on the 27th. There we go, Inverness, slightly out of sequence there. So there we go. I hope that's covered the main headline points about what the hub does as fast as I could get through it, because I really want to hand over now to Sally so we can hear more about the Highlands and Islands Environment Foundation Fund. Sally.
Great. Right, thanks very much, Sheila. If technology works for us, then hopefully I will be able to share my screen. Let's see. Oh, apparently it's preparing my, oh, there we go, preparing my slides. Great. Can everyone see that? Someone put a thumbs up, let me know if that's okay. Perfect, and hopefully everyone can hear me as well. Is that all going good? So as it says on the tin, my name is Sally McNaught. I'm the Executive Director of the Highlands and Islands Environment Foundation. And it's great to have an opportunity to speak to people today to tell you a little bit more about who we are and what we do, and hopefully see if there are ways that we can collaborate going forwards. So we are a Scottish charity, independent Scottish charity, but we're part of a larger family of funds called the Conservation Collective. The Conservation Collective now has 20 funds all around the world, but we all operate on the same model, and that is pooling together donations from different sources of donors. Sometimes it's high net worth individuals, sometimes it's trusts and foundations or corporates, and we use those monies to create a pool. And from that pool of money, we award grants to support community-led environmental initiatives. So Highlands and Islands Environment Foundation launched in October 2020. It feels like a lifetime ago, but yeah, towards the end of a global pandemic is certainly an interesting time to launch a new charitable fund. We exist, as I said, to support community-led environmental projects throughout the Scottish Highlands and Islands. So similar to the geographic coverage of the hub, we also cover the Western Isles and Argyll though as well. One of the reasons we were formed was there was a report done which looked at the percentage of charitable monies that was available to support environmental projects. And as I'm sure any of you who've looked for funding has found already, it's actually a very small percentage. It's around 3% of charitable monies, which is tiny really. But within that, there was also quite a big disparity between what was available south of the border and north. With very broad brush figures, it was about £2 per person, per capita rather, south of the border, and only £1 north of the border. Whereas when you look at the environment that we have huge potential. And that's one of the main reasons that we were founded when we were. Our grants have ranged between £5,000 and £15,000 a year, and we have 3 grants rounds a year. So you can apply to us at any of those rounds. And we support projects. We've defined it more on the basis of the habitat that we support rather than necessarily by the individual type of project. So we will support projects in forest and woodland, or inshore marine, or freshwater, or montane habitats. So essentially any of those. Quick look at what we've done. So we launched, as I say, at the very end of 2020, and we awarded just under £37,000 in that first round. That's grown steadily. Last year, we were just under £160,000, and that's monies that we have awarded directly. I also work and collaborate with other funders and have levered about the same amount again, maybe slightly more. And that's where projects have come into us and the steering committee have approved them, but essentially we haven't had enough money in the kitty to support them. And in those instances, I can forward applications on to other funders and potentially look to secure that investment in the project from that other source. So as I said, in terms of habitats, we have 4 key habitats that we support. Perhaps not altogether surprisingly, when you look at the geographic footprint of our area, we're slightly heavy in that just over half of the projects that we've supported have dealt with issues in the inshore marine environment. The others are all pretty much of a muchness, really, in terms of what we've supported. Oh, why is that not working? Oh, there we go. In terms of grant pillars, there's quite a number of pillars. I suspect this is probably quite small for people to read, but I believe the slides will be shared later, so you can have a look at that in more detail. Essentially, the first ones are kind of what it says on the tin: landscape regeneration, river restoration, field work, marine conservation. Community engagement for us is things like engagement training, capacity building, citizen science, public events and outreach, that type of thing. An example of a grant there would be, we gave a grant to the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest towards employing a lower plants specialist to make sure that plans that were afoot there to regenerate the temperate rainforest did so in a way that would support the very important lower plants that are core there. Campaigns, info and awareness raising, policy and advocacy. One of the projects we've supported in that genre is Coastal Communities Network. We've given them some support looking at developing a mapping and modelling tool looking at cumulative potential threats from salmon farms, particularly sea lice, particulate waste and dissolved nutrients. Networking, really important that everybody has an opportunity to share best practice and learn from what other people are doing. We gave a grant to Sea Wilding based in Ardfern to do a pilot test for seagrass germination, looking at how they could improve germination of collected seed. But that also fed into UK and indeed European-wide best practice on that. Technical support, equipment, study, consultancy. We gave a grant to the West Loch Ness Farmer Cluster to help them get set up and do some initial, pull in some consultants initially to do baseline surveys. Our main criteria, we really only have two primary criteria for any grant that we award. The project must tackle first and foremost an environmental issue. So it may have socio-economic or other benefits, but the primary reason for a project to exist is that it delivers environmental benefit. And it must be either community-led, or if for technical reasons not community-led, it must be able to evidence very strong local community support. And for us, a community isn't necessarily exclusively a geographic community. So it could be a community of interest. So for example, if it's a river and you're looking from catchment area right down to the sea, it could be angling clubs that all benefit from that river, but in different areas. That's a community of interest as far as we're concerned. Our application process, we've refined this a little bit last year, and it's now a two-stage process. So on our website, you will find an expression of interest form. It's a very straightforward 2 sides of A4 form, and essentially asks you to tell us who you are, what your idea is, what environmental issue it's going to deal with, and how much money you'd be looking for. And once those expression of interest forms are submitted by the deadline, the steering committee, who are all donors to the fund as well as being volunteers in terms of taking it forwards, they review those expression of interest forms and agree who will be invited to submit a fuller application. I then send a link to an online application form which is completed. We then have a panel of, for lack of a better description, technical experts who will review an application. We specifically ask them not to recommend whether something should be funded or not. What they're doing is commenting on the application. So is what's being put forward actually technically feasible within the timescale and the budget and based on the plan that's been put forward? How would that particular project contribute to other works that are going on in that area at the time? That type of thing. That feedback and the application form and some additional information from myself all goes to the steering committee at their meeting, and that's where they look over all that information and will make recommendations on grant awards. Those are then vetted by the trustees and hopefully then awarded to the successful applicants. Oh, that's not worked. Let's try that. There we go. Timelines for this year. We'll have 3 timelines this year. Oh, thanks, Alice, for popping that in the chat. The first deadline has just passed, and we had 12 expression of interest forms submitted, of which 6 have been invited to complete a full application. That doesn't mean that we'll award 6 grants. It is still a very, very competitive process and has become more competitive in the 3 years that we've been awarding grants. The committee will meet on the 26th of March, and grants from this round will be awarded from April onwards. Our next deadline is 9 AM on Monday, the 22nd of April, and those grants, those applications will be considered in July. And the final one for this year is 9 AM on Monday, the 14th of October, and grants from that round will be awarded in December. So it's usually a fairly quick turnaround after the steering committee have met, provided the trustees have no issue with the recommendations. I appreciate that's an incredibly fast whistle-stop tour of who we are and how we all work, but I am going to stay around, and I'm very happy to answer questions. Probably better to do it at the end, I think, so we can get all the speakers through together. But hopefully you're still listening, so thank you for your attention. And if I can work out how to stop sharing. Alice, any help here would be good. I thought I'd done the really difficult technical bit, and now I can't find the bit that says stop sharing.
Oh.
I'm so sorry, Annabelle. I think I'm now eating into your time.
No, don't worry. It's I'm on a phone. I'm not sure what the controls are for stop sharing.
Oh, good. Someone else has taken back presentation. Thank you, Alice. You're an absolute star. So yeah, Annabelle very kindly agreed to talk about her experience, I think, of having funds from Highlands Lands Environmentation. Yeah. We've supported Coolis with 2 projects now, I think, the Loch Allen oysters and the biodiversity survey. So without any more faffing around from me, Annabelle, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for setting the stage so well, because it really, everything you said kind of just agrees with everything that we have tried to do. So is my slide up? My first slide.
We're just getting them sorted now, Annabelle.
Okay. Thank you. So I suppose the aim of the chat is to sort of draw out the key points that make applying for funding, you know, what we've done in order to be successful, and also some of the key messages are about simplicity and being feasible, and reflecting the size of the amount of the money that you're requesting, and is it doable within the time scale. So all these things kind of frame our approach to funding. And when I say simple, I don't mean the work we're doing is simple, but the idea is simple. So it's a relative term, but so it's a first slide coming up.
We're working on it.
Okay.
The royal we. Alice has done it. Thank you, Alice.
Yay,
there you go.
great,
That's your first slide.
So so I think from our point of view, and I guess from the funders' point of view, being very clear about who you are, or who we are, and what we do is really key. And what we do kind of informs the nature of our organisation and its structure. So we obviously started off as a group of like-minded people in 2014, but by 2017 we'd formed as a charity. We had a constitution, a board of trustees. And this is important for understanding how we function as a group, but also I think that's really important for funders to see that development of an entity that is capable of taking on funds in order to do some work. So the second slide. So yeah, so when thinking about funding, it's like a transition, and you don't really notice it until you reflect upon it. And for Coulis, having the funding from HIF in 2021, it has been completely transformational for Coulis, and it has enabled us to grow and be really effective to now, where we're in a position where we've got more capacity, more impact. We're raising awareness. We're doing all the things we wanted to do in a way that is sustainable into the future. So I've got here on this slide the before and after funding. So basically, before we had HIF funding, we were voluntary led. We were reactive. We had low capacity, low awareness base, and really quite a low impact in our area. Then post funding, we're able to be in a position where we're developing our volunteer base. We're more strategic. We've got increased capacity. The awareness of the issues we want people to know about are raised, and our impact is greater. And I've got in the top there, I said building a relationship with the funder, and I think this is really important. This isn't a one-off thing. The funder is there supporting you through this whole process. And since 2021, I'm not sure how many times myself and Sally have spoken, but it's a really supportive process that we've gone through in order to talk about what we want to do and secure funding for our aims and objectives. So if you go to the next slide. And Sally mentioned, when thinking about funding, the funding landscape is really complex. And the report that Sally sort of mentioned, there's also a piece in there about how much goes to marine environmental issues. And again, it's across the whole piece, it's quite an underfunded area. So the fact that HIF have that on their radar for us is really key. And the other part of this is that we were introduced to HIF through Sea Wilding. So there's that collaboration and that knowledge sharing across different groups. So Sea Wilding were able to help us with the sort of where, who, what, and how we were going to do, and that was basically the message from that is find a friend to collaborate with who can help you identify suitable funders and projects that are feasible and doable. So next slide. And you have a clear aim. So our clear aim was to restore our local biodiversity. And in our case, it was native oysters. And we took the learning from Sea Wilding and we adapted it slightly, and we created a project in Highlands. Next slide. And we started small, and we matched our resources and time to the outcomes that we wanted to achieve. So we wanted to establish if it was possible, and if it was possible, could we start to have a native oyster restoration project in the loch. Next slide. And we started off getting the basics right. So we set up our environmental monitoring. We had the appropriate equipment because we learnt that from Sea Wilding, and we were able to use the same kit that they had that had been tried and tested. So we weren't wasting any time. We had help from Marine Directorate in taking eDNA sampling in the loch before we introduced the oysters, so we could have an understanding of the baseline environmental conditions that the oysters were coming into. Next slide. And we at this point we're all sort of volunteers, but the funding from HIF allowed us to support all that with the right kit and the oyster stock. And so we'll build. So the idea is volunteers, we're building up the local knowledge and capacity within our community to take on this project. And we started off with 10,000 oysters in 2021, arriving in July, and we put them into the cages. Do you want to do the next slide? And we were obviously liaising with government, because we're aware that Marine Directorate want communities to be involved in marine restoration, So we're not working in isolation. We're very much about collaborating with other groups, but also speaking to the relevant authorities who can then help us in our project as well. Next slide. And along the way, we learnt a lot. We learnt an awful lot in this very first project. So this is our first cohort of oysters, and we had an incident where we had a lot of rainwater, and the oysters were very susceptible to high levels of fresh water, and we had a mortality event. And so from that, we learned that now we hang our cages a lot deeper into the lock, so we know that there's where the salt water isn't as impacted by the rain. So we learned a lot on the way. Next slide. And we had some success. So they arrived on the 13th of July at 1 gram, and by October they were 5.6, so they were growing healthily. Next slide. And throughout that time, we took the opportunity, the project, we kind of created a lot of interest locally. So we were able to share knowledge and bring new skills into the community while the project was going. And this is one of our outreach days with people coming to learn how to do biodiversity surveys. And next slide. And also we did a lot of outreach and education with local schools. And this is our local primary school, who've now visited the site about 4 times over the period of the project. So we wanted to make the most of our impact. And then of course we now have a reef. Well, we now have live oysters out in the loch. Do you want to press the little video button? So we've put 10,000 oysters out into what was a previous reef that had no live oysters anymore, but now we're releasing our grown oysters onto the seabed, and we're carrying on monitoring that site. So what does all this mean? So if you go to the next slide. So because we've been through this process, and we've learned a lot, and we've built capacity, and we've networked, it means that we're now in a position where we can create employment opportunities. We've got community capacity. We can look at doing more restoration sites, and that's all because we had this seed funding from HIF. So it's a really fantastic journey we've been on, which we couldn't have achieved this without that initial piece of funding. So now the Loch Allen Native Oyster Project is set to expand, and we have a few more sites to put more oysters out onto the seabed. And if you go to the next slide. And from all the learning we've done from that particular project, we're now looking at identifying other sites around our area where restoration could be possible. And this is the Morven Baseline Survey action plan. And we've identified about 10 sites around our coast where we think there might be opportunity to repeat what we've done in the loch elsewhere around our coastline. And there's a little inset there of some of the work we've done already, which is we've identified an area which is circled with the red circle, and this is a seagrass bed in just off the shore along the Sound of Mull. And so what we're doing now is we are collecting the environmental information about this site. We're mapping the site, and we are considering whether or not that site is having any pressures upon it, but also could this be a site where we could potentially allow that area to expand slightly from where it is. So this is our second project that's been funded by HIF, and so we're hoping that out of the sites that we're assessing, maybe a few candidates might be suitable for restoration, and we can take all the learning from the initial project and then deploy that on other sites. Next slide. And the thing about funding is that when you've had one person fund you, like HIF, then other funders tend to want to be involved. So we've been really fortunate enough to get more funding you know, over the last couple of years from other funders as well. And it's just interesting how once you build the capacity and you show that you can do things, that the funding picture kind of changes. But without the initial funding, you can't reach that point. So we're really fortunate to be able to demonstrate that we could deliver the Loch Allen Oyster project in a timely way, within budget, and with some good results. And I think it's one more slide. Is that this project also has wider implications, because we have a community action plan, and one of the outcomes in that is to have more biodiversity for Morven. So our work with Coulis is one of those strands of work where we can deliver the ambitions of the whole community. And in that sense, we're very much connected to the needs and wants of where we live and what the community is saying to us. And it's just a final slide, which is our little logo, which is a northern feather star, which is one of the priority marine features that's protected in our area. So thank you for that. And thank you for the funding from HIF.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. I do love your logo, it's beautiful. And also thank you for sharing. I think it's a really lovely example of the capacity you're able to just expand upon thanks to the funding and all the learning that you've brought. So it's not just what you've made in terms of difference in terms of the biodiversity, but the learning the skills, both the survey and monitoring, is really great. And I think my understanding is that it's a very supportive process too. So that's
yeah,
brilliant.
No, it's been really good. So that's my point was, at the end, I wrote it down. We're delivering what the community wants, and they've expressed in our community action plan. But at the same time, we can give nature a helping hand, and then they're not mutually exclusive. So the fact that we can take a project like this, and it raises awareness, and people get interested and they want to support it, that brings the community together, but it's also helping restore nature. So it's a win-win from our perspective.
That sounds brilliant. I think before we do questions, because I expect already people are starting to gather questions in their mind, but hold on to them if you want. Stick them in the chat if you think you'll get distracted by it. But we'll move on and we'll do our presentation from Martin from the Pebble Trust, and then we'll have questions all together, if that's okay. But if it helps to write down your questions now, do, but we'll deal with them a bit. Martin, are you happy to do your screen sharing?
I'm going to do my very best.
Excellent.
But first of all, thanks very much, Sally and Annabelle, for their very informative presentations. I think I'm rather hoping mine's going to stimulate questions rather than give quite so much information, because I haven't been quite so diligent as they have in preparing. But anyway, here we go. Fingers crossed. Anyway. Yeah. This is going to be a bit challenging, I'm afraid. Is that not working? Sorry, I did say to Sheila beforehand that I'm not very comfortable with Teams, but here we go. Right, now I can't see you anymore, but hopefully you can see my screen. Sheila, can you see that?
Yep, that's perfect, Martin. That's excellent.
Okay.
Good job.
Excellent. So I guess anyone who wasn't planning on coming to meet the funders session will already have realised that they're in the wrong place and have disappeared off. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to the Pebble Trust, and then I'm going to talk a bit about the criteria we use in deciding whether or not to fund an application, a little bit about the application process, and then I've got a few examples of maybe not exactly typical projects that we funded, but a sort of range of them at least. So The Pebble Trust has been around for 10 years. I'm not going to spend much time going into how it was formed, but essentially it focuses on sustainability issues. So I think certainly nature conservation is included in that, but it's a bit wider. And we make grants to support community projects, mainly in the Highlands and Islands, although not quite exclusively, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. And we do also actually commission some of our own work where we feel that there are important topics and we're not actually getting applications in that are covering those topics. We chose the name the Pebble Trust because we had a sort of vision of ripples in a pond, and the wee pebble sort of actually having a much bigger impact than you might expect from the size of it. So that was where we came from with the name. We also had a sort of an idea of a sort of David and Goliath, and David with his slingshot, but that's maybe not something that we should dwell on. Sort of whacking the Goliath of the establishment. Since we actually chose the name, we discovered there's another Pebble Trust in Brighton, which is a bit of a nuisance. Yeah, bear that in mind if you're doing a Google search of the Pebble Trust. So the trust is managed by a board of 7 trustees at the moment. We try and get a reasonable diversity of trustees. So we've got quite a wide age range at the moment, between sort of late 20s to late 60s. We do strive for gender balance, but we've ended up with 2 male and 5 female. Most of them have got, maybe actually all of them have got relevant professional expertise. So we don't generally bring in experts. We rely on our own expertise. We're mostly based around Inverness, and we'd quite like, if possible, to extend that and bring in maybe one more trustee from either the west or south of the Highlands and Islands area. So if anybody knows somebody they think might be interested in doing that, then pass them our way. So the first of our funding criteria, I suppose, is fairly obvious, which is that the project has to meet our objectives. And our objectives center around reducing resource use. And we use that phrase resource use in quite a wide sense. So, for instance, we would consider biodiversity as a resource in this context. And I guess it's about having a slightly lighter sort of impact on the planet. We're interested in developing local resilience, and we're interested in developing fairer and stronger communities. So most of the projects that we fund are community-based in terms of geographical communities, but there are some which are actually brought to us by bigger organizations, but we feel have the potential to benefit communities. Unsurprisingly, we take quite a keen look at value for money. And it was good that Annabelle mentioned in her presentation the importance of clear aims. And one of the things that we struggle with quite a lot in applications is that it's very hard for us to judge whether something is value for money unless people have given some sort of quantified indication of the outcomes that they're expecting from the project. So I would emphasize that is really important. There's also quite often a bit of a conflict in terms of value for money as to whether we're looking at value for the amount we're asked to contribute, or where we're co-funding with other grantors, whether it's the cost of the overall project. And our view on that is that if we're asked to fund quite a small part of a bigger project, we'll often sort of scratch our heads and wonder whether the project would probably have gone ahead even without our money. So we have an anticipation that where that's the case, we'll probably turn it down. But then on the other hand, there are some examples where it simply couldn't have gone ahead without our small contribution. And one example, for instance, there's a footpath project on Shetland where we were asked to contribute £4,000 out of an overall budget of over 100,000, and the main funder was happy to put in most of the money, but wanted to see that the community group had the capacity to bring in some funds themselves. So in that case, our £4,000 really tipped the balance and made the project viable. We're looking for the project to have the potential for lasting benefits. And I think, you know, some of the trustees have been around the block a few times and have been around long enough to realise that the outcomes of these projects aren't necessarily what was anticipated in the first place. And sometimes there are good things that come out that were never really planned, and some things that were planned don't happen. So I emphasize that potential bit of it. And also we're quite happy to put in very early stage money. And I'll come on to that a bit later on as well. So that potential is sort of relevant in that context. In fact, here it is. We're comfortable making an early stage contribution. So because we're quite a small fund, we've tried to differentiate ourselves from some of the bigger funding organizations. And one of the ways we do that is that we are quite relaxed. If we see a project which is very early stage but has the potential for a big impact, then we're quite happy to take a punt on that and fund it. We are also pretty open-minded on the type of organization that we fund. So it can be incorporated or unincorporated, and it can even be an individual or a business. The challenge that can arise there is that to meet our charitable objectives, that it needs to be very clear that the benefit of the project is for the public as a whole, rather than to specific individuals, and that any benefit to individuals is coincidental. So that can be quite a challenge, particularly where we've had applications from businesses. Like both the Climate Hub and HIEF, we have in our Highlands and Islands focus, but we have a third and different definition of that. So we use the Highlands and Islands enterprise definition of Highlands and Islands, which is the Highlands, Argyll and Bute, the Western Isles, Northern Isles, and Murray. And we have a maximum grant currently of £10,000. I should also put on the slide actually that we don't have a fixed amount to give out per year. And generally speaking, we fund all the projects that meet our criteria. So we never get ourselves into a position where we're saying this is a really good project, but we can't afford to fund it. Well, so far we haven't anyway. I guess if we were overwhelmed following this presentation, that might change. I think all of our trustees have probably been through grant applications from the other side of the fence. So we try to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. And we try to be reasonably quick with the whole thing as well, although with multiple trustees, it's not always possible. So the first step is, as you might expect, to download an application form from our website, complete it and send it in. We don't have any deadlines. We don't have any sort of panel meetings or anything like that. So our trustees will deal with applications as they come in, and we try to turn it around within a month or so. But once the once the trustees get the application, their response can be one of three things. It can be, yes, this is wonderful, no, we don't like it, or not quite sure. And actually the majority fall into that third not quite sure category. And we then go through a bit of a process of questions and answers, which is normally just one round. So the trustees will come up with a bunch of questions, which we'll fire out to the applicant and look at the answers. And at that point, it will be a very firm yes or no. Assuming the answer is yes, then we send out a formal offer and we ask applicants to sign that, give us their bank details and send it back. We then send the money, and I was quite interested in Sally's, I think it was Sally's, or maybe, I'm not sure who made the comment, but about an ongoing relationship. I have to say, mostly, we don't really hear anything after we sent the money out until we get an end of project report. We do welcome additional information when it comes through, and we do feel that we've got quite a wide-ranging view of sustainability projects in the Highlands and Islands, and I think we feel we've got the capacity to help organisations network where they would like that. But if they don't particularly want it, then that's fine. And the end of project report, we ask organisations to report about what the outcomes were and how that compares with the ones that they anticipated in their application. So again, that whole business of being clear about the aims and outcomes that are anticipated is really important. And we also ask them to report on how the money side of things went. So here are a few examples of projects that we have funded. The first one on the list is the Peffery River Restoration Project, and that's the photo at the sort of top right of the screen. So that river, which you can see there meandering around, up until a couple of years ago, it ran in a straight line through the trees. And where it is now is essentially the route that it used to take in the 19th century before it was canalised. And the canalisation has led to a decrease in wildlife, but also led to increased flooding risks in Dingwall. So we had an application to fund some initial survey work to establish the best approach to do the work. And we funded 80% of that. And then that seemed to show that it was all viable and feasible, and the project proceeded, and we were then asked for another £2,000 to fill a small gap in the actual construction budget. So altogether, we've put in just over £6,000 for those two phases, which to me looks like fantastic value for money. And we also recently heard that the team behind the work has been awarded another £1.2 million to extend the restoration to other parts of the river catchment. So that's quite a good example, I think, of an early stage intervention by the Pebble Trust, not just by the Trust, but by others as well, ultimately having a fantastic outcome. Completely different, and the middle sort of photo there is a small-scale oat dehuller, and this was brought to us by a baker and grower who's based near Fort William, and he'd recognised the problem for small cereal growers of appropriate machinery to process their harvest. So he'd already built a small scale oat dehuller, but there were problems with it basically. So he wanted funding from us to improve the design. Now this is kind of an interesting one because you could say, well, this is purely for his business, but actually he was working with the James Hutton Institute, and the Gaia Seed Sovereignty project. So the idea was to make the new design publicly available, open source, which is what he's done. And I can't say I actually know how many of these things have been used, but I think it's great that there's a possibility there for small-scale cereal growers to actually process their produce. And we put a grand total of £2,500 into that project, which again seems like very good value for money to us. Next on the list is the Tyroran woodland crofts, which is the left-hand photo. This was something that came to us about 4 years ago, and it was the Southwest Mull and Iona Development who had land where they wanted to establish 6 woodland crofts, and we contributed £5,000 to a feasibility study. So again, a very early stage project. That again was positive, and they put in an application to the Crofting Commission to establish these woodland crofts. And finally, in January this year, so 2.5 years after they submitted their application to the Crofting Commission, they heard that the crofts had been approved. So that's great news, and it means that potentially we've got 6 families being able to establish rural livelihoods on Mull. But again, it shows that the time taken to achieve the objectives and outcomes isn't sometimes much longer than you might expect. And then finally, another very different project, the Our Seas Coalition, and you've got the picture there of the boat under the Skye Bridge. So the Our Seas is a coalition of groups campaigning on marine conservation issues, and we contributed £5,000 to a film which was calling for the reintroduction of a 3-mile exclusion zone to prevent bottom toad fishing around the coast of Scotland. The eventual outcome of that campaign, I think, is still very much in the balance, but I think it has moved or helped move that topic up the agenda, and there does seem to be a growing consensus that action of some sort is required to prevent further damage to the inshore ecosystem, both from a biodiversity and from a climate change point of view. So